welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We have invited back one of our favorite people who speaks about Kabbalah, astrology, and ancient wisdom altogether, and that's Joseph Mark Cohen, commonly known among his friends as a Rebbe, sometimes as a Rav. He has just truly deserved a lot of acknowledgement for the studious work he has done in the domain of Judaica and spiritual traditions around the world. It's really a pleasure to have Joseph Mark back on A Better World after many years, actually, and he's in New York briefly, and we wanted to take advantage of picking his brain and his heart about his wisdom, understanding of Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, this essential germane teaching in ancient Jewish understanding. And actually before that, but we'll be speaking about it pretty much from that point forward. Joseph Mark, shalom.
Shalom, delight to be here again.
Great to have you again. So, if you would, please, for our audience, lay out what is Kabbalah. So many people, especially in New Age circles these days, love to reference it, but few people have really taken the time to delve deeply into it.
That's true.
So I would love for you to share with our audience. I know we don't have a huge amount of time, but you are good and succinct in getting the message across. So if you would lay out the Tree of Life, the Sefirot, and what you feel we should know to have some reasonable grasp of this brilliant, wise, old subject.
Okay, let's just say that the Tree of Life, it's Chaim, is a beautiful teaching that teaches us, it parallels the chakras in certain ways, so it's a biological, psychological, and spiritual dimensions of a human being. And the Tree of Life is just, it's a major aspect of Kabbalah, but Kabbalah means to receive. So it's how a human being receives spiritual awareness, spiritual perception. And there are certain things called creation codes as well that's part of Kabbalah, which is part of what you could call sacred science, which takes you into the whole world of from harmonics to cymatics to sound to how spirit manifests
In the
but we'll start with Eitz Chaim. The 10 spheres, there's actually 11 because Da'at is the 11th sphere, but there are in traditional Kabbalah there's 5 zivugs, 5 marriages. So I'll start with that. You have the marriage of heaven and earth, which is Keter and Malchut, which is often spoken about in scripture. And Keter is technically the crown chakra. It's the satellite dish by which we receive higher frequencies from other dimensions. But if you have to localize it, you can localize it in the pineal gland, because that's a Hebrew word, pineal. It means the face of God, or the face of the Elohim, or the presence of the divine frequencies. There's many ways you can translate that if you want. And that energy, combined with Malchut, which is where the feet touch the earth, is the earth energy frequency. So you're working with the harmonics of higher dimensions,
heaven and earth,
coming through the nervous system. And Kabbalah teaches that you have to have your feet on the earth and be grounded,
feet on the ground,
and be able to be a lens or a tube of light, a vessel on this planet. So that's the primary way of seeing the human nervous system. But unlike the Hindu chakra systems, which is just going up and down the column, Kabbalah deals in polarity pairs. So within the hemispheres of our brain, and we've just discovered that in the past 100 years, really, we have the Chokhmah side. Western science, yeah. We have the Chokhmah side and the Bina side. And the Bina side is the feminine cosmic memory bank, as it were. So I guess if you were Hindu, it would be the Akashic records.
And the cosmic receptor.
Yeah. And the Chokhmah side is your visionary capacities to image in kind of a digital video form, seeing the future.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a part of your brain, hemispheric, that is visionary oriented in the timeline, and a part of your brain which holds all of the emotional memory bank. Now, in a certain sense,
By the way, not to interrupt, but just
Yeah,
to
yeah.
say and to mix a metaphor,
Yeah,
further east
Yeah.
would be the yin and the yang, the chokhmah being a trajectory into a future
Yes.
vision, if you will,
Yeah.
and the other being a receptor site, being the yin aspect of receiving
Yeah.
and holding,
Yeah.
containing.
And in a certain sense, your emotional memory bank is your memory of all your past lives.
Absolutely, it keeps
You know,
going.
and your chokhmah is your capacity to improvise and bring the spirit part of you that hasn't made it yet into your lifetime, into the time-space continuum you live in.
So that the chokhmah really includes a creative spark.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know,
Because one of the things I like about Kabbalah is that there are, you could say, differentiations of intelligence, and it's a way of
It's
looking
true.
at it. Intellectual, emotional, but even within each of those, there are different gradations.
right? And
Is
as
that so?
it is so, and as a Kabbalistic astrologer, I'm going to put Saturn in Bina and Uranus in Chokhmah. And Saturn is memory, it's destiny, and in Greek mythology, Saturn is looked at as a difficult karma keeper, we'll say, okay? Whereas
Well,
in
it certainly is the
Hebrew-
integrity keeper.
yeah, whereas and it's usually seen as masculine and male,
Yes.
whereas in the Hebrew world, Saturn is Bina and it's female,
that's
and it's the
interesting.
great mother memory. So when I'm looking at a chart and I see Saturn, I can use both filters, but I'm going to reframe it into the karmic records and what you've come in with and what you've accomplished in
Yes.
previous lives, and that's totally different than a
Interesting.
Hindu astrologer, really.
Yes,
So astrology takes on different flavors in different cultures,
definitely.
and I'm interested.
Different structures,
Yeah.
literally.
And I'm
Different-
interested in the mythopoeic structure of many cultures: the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Hebrews, the Cherokee. So, as a Kabbalistic astrologer, I'm kind of widening the aperture a bit. But let's take
Back to the Sephirot.
back to the Sephirot. Now we're going to the heart chakra, and you're looking at, and we'll go a bit to Chinese medicine too, because your interests are there, where you've got Gevura being where you're, you have discipline, and you're contracting, and it's actually gallbladder liver frequencies, whereas Chesed is lungs and it's compassion. So in a
Mercy.
certain sense,
Yeah.
Gevura is strengthening into self-will, really, and Chesed is where you're giving and compassionate. And you can see there's a bit of a crossover from the masculine and the feminine from one world to the next. So there's some complexity to it. And remember, there was this psychologist, Rolla May, who wrote a whole book about love and will. So will is in Gevura, love is in Chesed,
Chesed.
and the balance
Yes.
between the love and the will, when you get to that exquisite balance, then you've got a Tiferet, a place where you can house beauty open, and that's the heart. So the heart
Is that connected with compassion?
is the balance between the will
And
the
love.
and love.
And, okay.
You know, so
Slash
there has,
compassion.
you have to have self-discipline combined with intense generosity of spirit and
Mhm.
heart connection. So, and
It's the
Tiferet,
openness and a boundary.
yeah,
if you will.
exactly. And if you're an artist, you know that the bounding line. I was a student of William Blake, at least in university I was, and the bounding line is very important.
Not him himself, but nonetheless.
You know,
of his
I
poetry.
actually had experiences where I felt his presence. I mean, because Blake's epic poetry was so potent. I mean, he understood the psyche before Jung did.
Yeah.
Really,
Oh yeah.
you know.
Sure.
And he was a great visionary, both visionary in his art and visionary in his poetry.
Many poets and literary giants did.
Yeah,
Artists.
yeah. So anyways, we'll go one further step down, and then we're into Netzach and Hod. And Hod is more, if you were talking about it in music, Hod would be resonance. So it's called praise in Hebrew.
Oh.
And Netzach is, how shall I say it? It's basically rhythmic and moves you into the world of dance and kinesthetics. So when I'm looking at Hod and Netzach, I'm looking at capacities in a human being for voice and for rhythm and
Expression
in a, could be a dramatic, could be in a ceremonial way.
The point is that it's somatizing the higher levels of the
Exactly,
second world.
into movement and into
Physical
tone
expression.
and physical expression. And biologically, Netzach and Hod, in Chinese medicine, you'd look at Hod as kidney energy and Netzach as pancreas spleen energy.
Oh, really?
So that's a whole other filter that can fit very comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
And the Tree of Life
Interesting.
work is actually more easily translated into Chinese medicine than it is Hindu chakra work, really. It's very, very, very interesting in that way.
So then, just this structure, before you said something about the Hindu chakra system appears to be sort of a vertical line through the spinal cord, or approximate. But here, with the Tree of Life, what we have is, maybe you could diagram it a little bit for us.
Well, I think you
that
probably...
it's more anatomical in a sense.
It's more anatomical, and you'll find a beautiful photograph and art piece to throw into
we will
the
put
video,
that up.
I'm sure.
Yes.
And, Zev Shimon HaLevi spent all of his time with the Tree of Life. So he's written some good books about it.
Exactly.
Based on Gurdjieffian and psychological work.
Okay, yes.
But I'm practical, and I'm working with it so that anybody that comes to me and I'm looking at their astrology chart, what I do is I look at the degree placement of planets of their chart, and then I translate that, and I look at what I call the gematria code. So I have Hebrew words at certain number of values, and I am able to get
so you get the mathematical qualitative value.
Exactly, and then I have to expand that out into a whole soul reading, and I'll get a little bit of the Akashic records and a little bit of the soul purpose from that, and it's quite specific in a poetic way. We have one more. We've got to do the Yesod, which is, again, it's connected to the emotional body and to the kishkas, if you want. So that's the kishkas, and it's the solar plexus.
The intensums.
Yeah. And the Yesod, Jung said that it took a human being till the age of 35 before they were in balance between the sun and the moon, which in Kabbalah, which would be between the Tiferet and Yesod. So the Yesod is your visceral response to things, your biological, your gastrointestinal tract, whereas the heart is how you're integrating the higher chakras of the so-called mind, or the Keter, but the balance between the Yesod and the Tiferet, between the Kishka memory and the heart chakra perceptual place, is another zivug, another level where two things have to come into balance.
It's so interesting, Joseph Mark, because our gut understood this all along, but neuroscience has, of course, come in and has helped to illustrate things that we've always known, such as gut intelligence, heart intelligence, mind intelligence, and what we really have these days is what we could refer to as three primary brains. I mean, there are three brains here too, but just meaning brain, as in prefrontal cortex, and head brain, heart brain, which Heart Math Institute has gone far in helping to articulate, and gut brain,
And understand.
Where we get, so we have an alignment with these three. But what we're hearing here with you is that the ancient, really honestly, Egyptians and the ancient Jews understood this through their meditative practices, through any number of means through which they came to realize the wisdom of, and the formation then of the Kabbalah.
Right, and you mentioned Egypt. I'm going to do a little side thing here because I have a book in my library by two French rabbis. And they convinced me, really, that the Jewish people, Hebrew, came out of Amarna with Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and that Hebrew energy was spoken in Amarna, and then the Exodus was the exodus of those people around Akhenaten and Nefertiti to Israel, where there was already an Egyptian therapeutic group called the Essenes, planted.
Okay.
So
you are essentially corroborating what I'm implying.
Okay. So
nice.
out of
I'm
the,
really
the
glad to hear the
extraordinary
substantiation.
out of the extraordinary sacred site from Atlantis into the Egyptian culture that got adulterated by black magic, really. The Hebrew people and Moses came to keep what was good and purify it on the emotional level, and then it was mythologized that happened at the same time as the Santorini volcano blew up and created the Exodus. Now this is big.
Wow.
This is something that
So that has a really nice, It has a nice historicity to it as well as the mythological.
Exactly.
Here.
Exactly.
Oh,
and then
that's
I
very
believe.
Tell more about the earthquake.
Well,
Since we're off subject.
sure. That
In a way.
super quake.
Circuitously.
That super quake from Santorini threw lava and ash over the Mediterranean and created what we read in the Torah of the plagues for the Exodus.
Oh.
And I had a friend in Sedona, Yananda, wonderful channel, and his theory, and I can't say it's not right, is that Moshe had guidance, Moses, from the Syrian cultures and a UFO, and he was guided every step of the way for those 40 years by his pineal gland attunement, by his chokhmah to a higher dimension, and there had to be a purification process, which is what traditional Judaism says. When you're in a place where there's darkness, it's going to take a step-by-step purification, like 40 years in the wilderness, to get that out of the habit patterns of the emotional.
Oh, yes.
You know?
Very interesting. So, the history then looks like what I have always kind of entertained, which is that what we have as the Jewish Kabbalah is really an import and an enhancement in many ways of the original Egyptian sacred science, which really itself came from the Atlantean, and
with a little bit of African black culture thrown in.
Wow,
you know,
very cool. Exactly. I mean, Egyptian.
My Egyptian teacher Abdul Hakim Awan, he was talking about the Chemician wisdom. Now, people, again, if they're reading the Bible, they don't quite understand that the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Yafet, represent three different traditions. Shem is the Semitic, Ham is the Chemitic, the Egyptian, the black, the African, and Yafet is proportion. That's the Greek energy of mathematics and temple building and all of that. So it's like all of this is in the Hebrew Torah.
What's the lineage of the Greek then?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know genetically.
Right.
But they obviously, like every culture on this planet, has a vibrational connection, I believe, to various cultures coming from star systems.
Yes.
And we're just opening that up now, where you've got the Pleiadians coming in for the native tribes, the Mayan, and the Hopi, and the Cherokee are very connected to the Hebrew people. They still celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday. And genetically they found that the Cherokee came from Greece and Israel. And they probably migrated.
The Cherokee?
The Cherokee. They probably came over in boats in the time of Atlantis. So there's a whole new understanding of history opening up.
Beautiful.
And Kabbalah has to do with looking into the codes of that and receiving it, and it's to break judgmentalism, for sure. Unfortunately, within all the traditions where you have people who are paid to be the priests, they're going to have a certain element of judgmental, and they're passing on a tradition. But Kabbalah is looking through the lens of the tradition to find the origins of things. So it's pretty radical.
On earth and
in heaven, you bet.
Okay.
You got it.
You know, I was at a Jungian conference some years back, Joseph Mark,
Yeah.
and a woman who's a Jungian analyst also is also an amateur astronomer.
Oh, good.
And she said, let me tell you all from the outset, we are all star dust. Scientifically.
And Joni Mitchell, we're
This
golden,
is what
too.
we are, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Jody. But, you know, in other words, what would have otherwise been considered merely a poetic allusion is actually scientific fact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we would find many examples if we were to comb through,
Yeah.
you know, the annals of history
Yeah.
to find those. But it's just in light of this conversation.
Right.
So
now,
please go on.
I wanted to share one more thing. Kabbalah is a sacred science in and of itself, connected to harmonics and frequency. And where that
Light and
goes,
sound we've got.
where that goes is to Gematria. So I've made this big, long study of Gematria.
Explain what Gematria is.
Gematria is sacred numbers. Every Hebrew word has a Gematria. Every phrase has a Gematria. So there's a whole physics code.
What that means is that every letter of the Hebrew alphabet also has a specific number that is attached, corresponds to it. So you can read the Zohar, you can read any ancient Hebraic text mathematically.
Absolutely.
And there's a quantity to the number and there's a quality to the number.
So that's a big study of mine. I spent many years keeping a dictionary of Gematria as I was reading Torah, because I had a good childhood. And so that I'm reading it on, you know, a few different levels.
Yes.
And I found a code. And it's a code that no other code.
And it's not the known Bible code.
No,
and that's how the Bible code, by the way, works.
Yes,
because it's
exactly.
Essentially a series of additions.
Yeah.
It is utterly fascinating.
It is fascinating.
It really is.
So the code I found.
Yours is?
Because I'm an astrologer, I think in 360 degrees as wholeness. 360 is wholeness. So I found different Hebrew words that match together. Yeah, exactly. So when I'm seeing Moshe at 3:45, his partner is Yah, 15, to make wholeness. And if I'm looking at Eitz Chaim, as I think it's 2:28, the match to that is Kabbalah, actually the root for Kabbalah. And 137.
Oh, so it will match again. 360, 360,
Yeah,
360.
that's right. So it just blows my mind. And then when I
and these are biblical couples.
That's right.
Biblical important relationships.
Ones, yeah. And Kabbalah itself is the fine constant structure, 137. Kabel. And it has a partner too, as 223. Which comes up in the Hebrew word avrech. It's mentioned about in Joseph in Egypt, but the word means I will bless. Avarech, avarach. So I will bless, and to receive our mate. The I will bless is the the Great Spirit.
Is the young
lying out the magic carpet of frequencies. And the I will receive is the opening of the aperture of the perception of the heart intelligence, the mind intelligence, the kishka intelligence, to what the great mystery has laid down on the magic carpet for us. One could say, like that.
Beautiful.
So Kabbalah is so
Again, it's
poetic.
that yang and yin relationship of
and it has
the offering of the blessing and the receiving of the blessing.
That's right. And that's a primary metaphor within Kabbalah. And Jason Schulman worked with that in healing work. And, so Kabbalah can go into any world. It can go into physics. It can go into mathematics. It can go into relationship counseling. It
Yes,
can go
right.
into astrology because it's
And
a
psychologically, would you say, Joseph Mark, that the application of the Sefirot could be a lens through which we look at a person's personal development
that
and
would
growth?
be ideal, and
Right.
it's stayed a little too theoretical from my standpoint. You know, because when you're with somebody, once you know where their primary perceptual lens is, you'll have a better communication with them. A miscommunication is when you get somebody who lives in their heart chakra and doesn't understand their partner who lives in their mind, but they have to come to a balance.
That's right.
So relationships help us out that way, but it's good to know our own biases from the Tree of Life, and it's good to know some soul history from the Tree of Life, and it's good to know how to be in Chokhmah and how to map out the future. And that's what astrologers are supposed to do, is to help with the mapping and to understand the soul history. So I just happen to use a very particular Hebraic Kabbalistic lens for that. I'm not fond of Greek astronomy particularly. I want to use the correspondences from the Tree of Life.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier for me.
That's very interesting. Well, it's in your DNA, so
Yes,
it does make a
exactly.
lot of sense, you know.
Exactly.
But it's very interesting. So, if you were, can you maybe for the sake of time,
Wrap
we
it up,
cannot go into the other finer points of
No, I
each
just
of the
wanted to just
Sefirot.
give a little
But-
taste. You know?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
that really does outline something
Yeah.
because it does also give an evolutionary perspective on how we can develop as human beings
Right.
as members of a species, and how we can be informed with this kind of wisdom intelligence.
And if you're Hebrew or Jewish, it might help you in knowing what angel to call in for help. Because in
Wow.
Kabbalah there's an angelic correspondence to each of the
Yes,
spheres of the
indeed.
Tree of Life.
Indeed.
You know?
Exactly.
I'll do one more thing before we leave. There's a group, there's a word in Hebrew, argaman. It's a beautiful color. It came from some sea creature. It's like a purple with a bit of a red in it. It's used as a dye in Bedouin fabric, Mayan fabric too. Argaman is a code for 5 angels. Uriel, Raphael, Gavriel, Mikael, and Nuriel. And so those 5 angels, you can put them, you know, above and below, and in the four, you know, you can create a whole web of light. with
Yes, the
that.
whole geometry.
So the angelology is also part of the Tree of Life in Kabbalah. So we'll leave now, and I'll just ask that the angel Nuriel, which is the angel of the inner light, the inner menorah,
Nur.
be Nur.
Arabic for light.
Absolutely. That be available to those who have just watched this video. Okay? That's the blessing.
Thank you so
Shalom,
much.
shalom.
Shalom. And good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. That was so rich, and obviously we're being smiled upon by the angels right here and now. So thanks again for joining. Please write to me at mjr@abetterworld.net. I love to get your feedback and your comments, and visit us at our website as well, and we'll put yours on
That's
as
fine.
well, of course. Again, thanks, and I look forward to seeing you all